My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, St. Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Jesus, today we hear a parable about servants receiving pounds to invest on behalf of their master. Now, in many ways, the themes that come up in this gospel are a bit strange to us. Some of the servants do well and earn the respect of their master, but one in particular gets a real tongue lashing and exits the parable in a very bad light. Now, if you hear this parable at Mass today, you might be a bit shocked by how Jesus ends the parable. But as for my enemies, who did not want me for their king, bring them here and execute them in my presence. We're not used to hearing you speak like this, Jesus. In fact, the violent world in which we often live, we seek refuge in you as the one who brings peace. Now, for me, this parable throws up two questions, and maybe we can spend these minutes of prayer trying to seek some answers to them. But Jesus, we ask for your Spirit in abundance, so that when we meet things that are difficult for us to understand, we don't just ignore them, but we bring them before you in prayer and ask for your help in trying to understand what you're trying to say to us. The first question which this parable of the pounds asks me is how we are to spend this time before you, Jesus, return with all your angels in glory. This question was front and center in the minds of Christians in the early church. For those who were lucky enough to have seen you and to have heard you when you were upon this earth, there was a deep longing to see you again. And many Christians in the first decades of the church firmly believed that after you ascended into heaven, you would return very soon. In one sense, I'm excited to think of you coming again, Jesus, to see you in all your glory. I think it'll be wonderful. The times when we get a little glimpse of your glory, when we're at Mass, for example, or when we read about your miracles in the Gospel, it gives us a real taste for what is to come. But in another sense, I'm a bit apprehensive about your return to earth to judge us for all eternity. Have I done enough to praise you, Lord? Have I always been sincere in seeking to do your will? And most of all, have I made the most of what I believe you are asking me to do in my life? I remember at school that a girl had a sticker on her file that said, "Jesus is coming, look busy." Well, maybe sometimes we think of you, Jesus, like our boss. If anyone has had a part-time job, then they'll know that, well, sometimes we slack off a bit and when we should really be working, either because we get a bit lazy or just because we can't be bothered to go full steam all the time. But when we hear the footsteps of the boss coming, then it's amazing how quickly we can go from lounging around to looking incredibly industrious in a matter of seconds. We don't want to get caught. This is, of course, looking busy. Then let's get back to the sticker. Jesus, do we just want to look busy when we feel you might be watching over us more intently, like the boss? It's almost as if we forget that you see and hear us all of the time. Not because you're like some sort of controlling boss watching us on the CCTV camera, but because you actually love us. We pray at the start of these meditations, I firmly believe that you see me and that you hear me. But it's not just whenever I pray. Maybe sometimes I need to ask myself, do I really believe it firmly? This parable tells us that the nobleman went to a distant country. In other words, the servants weren't expecting him back anytime soon. The parable invites us, therefore, to imagine that the time between the servants getting the pound and the return of their master is quite considerable. So they have more than enough time to do the business that he asks of them. Well, some of the servants set about doing what the master has entrusted them quickly, since they are able to yield a great investment on what they have been given. If this parable is about waiting for you, Jesus, to return from heaven, then we have to see ourselves as those servants who have been entrusted with great investments. Jesus, we don't just want to look busy. We want to be like the good servants who waste no time at all in trying to build your kingdom here on earth. So if I firmly believe that you see me and that you hear me, then I'll try to be a little bit more focused on the fact that every second of my life is the time for making good on the investment of building up your kingdom. But maybe some concrete ideas could be helpful here. I think a good plan of my spiritual life would give me more than enough structure to build my day around building your kingdom. I should make sure that every day I pray for long enough to keep me on the path where you need me to be, Jesus. And I could concretely show my desire to build your kingdom in the way in which I forgive others when they offend me, and genuinely try to be a good friend to others, so they can see that I am a person who is trying to take your gospel seriously. In these ways, Jesus, help us to see that I am making good on the investments that you have given to me, and I'm spending good time waiting until you come again in glory. The second thing which I want to pray about, Jesus, and I'm asking for your help in trying to understand this, is the violence with which this parable ends. In some versions of the gospel, this parable ends in Luke chapter 19:27 like this: "Nonetheless, for those enemies of mine who did not want me to be king over them, bring them here and slaughter them in my presence." Now, if we've understood this parable correctly, Jesus, it's about your return at the end of time, when you will call all of us to give an account of how we have spent our time. Is it true that those whom you deem to be enemies will meet such a brutal end? In many ways, this is quite challenging for us to understand because the language of the nobleman in the parable is so strong. It might help us to delve a little bit deeper into the text of the Bible in order to understand what you're trying to say, to see if we can grasp the meaning of this violent end from the context a little bit more clearly. St. Luke uses the word enemy 9 times in his gospel, and most often it's in the context of showing love towards our enemy or doing good to those who have been bad to us. But when the Lord speaks about the reckoning at the end of time, there is no more mercy for those who have persisted in being his enemy. The first thing this teaches us is that, Jesus, you're not inviting us to be anything other than loving towards our enemies. But the only one who can effectively deal out justice is you. So even when we want to, we can't get even with those who have crossed our path. We shouldn't even admit a harsh comment against them because it's not really justified. Jesus, you are the judge and not us. Still, it's a little hard to think of you, Jesus, being angry. Well, there are, I suppose, many situations which could provoke the anger of God. One of the most common expressions in the Old Testament is that the Lord burned with anger, and usually because the people did not observe what you commanded them to do. Do you, therefore, God, get angry when we don't do what we're told? Well, my mum and dad will tell you that any parent gets angry when their child doesn't do what they're told to do, especially when what our parents ask us to do is for our own good and to keep us safe. How much more so then with God? Does injustice in our world make you angry, God? Well, I think it does. Does your divine anger burn against those who murder or steal or oppress the innocent and the unborn? Of course it does. But it's not the whole story. God, you burn with anger to call us to repent. Any child knows that it's certainly the time to say sorry when they see that their mum or dad is upset over something stupid that we've done. It is the devil, however, who provokes us to sin and then watches us suffer the consequences of it and tries to steal us away from your mercy. This little story might try to put all these questions into perspective. One day a boy was playing with a tennis ball in the house, bouncing it around and just having a bit of fun. Even though he'd been told hundreds of times before not to do it, he did it anyway, because like most boys, he just liked messing around. He was bouncing the ball off the hard floor when he hit it too hard and it bounced out of his control and hit the family picture on the mantelpiece. The picture came crashing to the ground and a huge chunk broke off the top of the frame. "I'm dead," he said to himself. Frantically, he rushed over to it and tried to see how he could salvage the damage. Just when he thought it was all over, his brother came upon the scene and, surveying the damage, said, "Mum is going to kill you." This did not help at all. The boy did, however, have a brainwave and decided to glue it back together, but he needed his brother's glue. "Please give me your super glue," he pleaded. Reluctantly, the brother agreed, but he knew that this meant he would gain the advantage. Together, the brothers glued the frame back together and set it back on the mantelpiece, good as new. The days that followed, however, soon became intolerable for the boy, who had fallen into the slavery of his brother. Anytime he wanted something, he commanded his brother to get it, on the threat of telling Mum what he had done if he didn't. It became a stick that was beating him. And when he could finally take no more of his brother bossing him around and threatening to spill the beans, he went to his mum and confessed the whole matter. I'm sorry, I broke the frame and we glued it back together. The boy then recoiled, awaiting the inevitable wave of parental anger. Well, I'm glad you finally admitted it, his mum said. I knew that the frame had been damaged. I saw it sitting funny on the mantelpiece. And upon closer inspection, I saw green fibres from your tennis ball in one corner and clumps of your brother's superglue in the other corner. And when your dad and I saw how your brother was bossing you around, we thought we'd just wonder how long it would take for you to realise it's better to say sorry and to accept the penalty than to become a slave of the one who doesn't have your best interests at heart. Jesus, you see and hear everything we do. And we want to use the time we have to build your kingdom here on earth. Help us to avoid your anger by doing your loving will and not becoming enslaved to the devil, who wants nothing but our destruction. Mother Mary, help us to be good sons and daughters of God and to be brothers and sisters of one another. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me during this meditation. I ask your help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, St. Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.